Alex Eala's coach didn't come with excuses, hype, or empty confidence. He came with a single statement that fans didn't expect and couldn't stop talking about. In the middle of preparing for the biggest tournament of her season, he said something about his own player that revealed exactly why she keeps rising when others fall. Was it a compliment? Was it a warning to her rivals? Or was it the quiet truth behind the biggest Cinderella run in Philippine tennis history? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why one sentence from a quiet coach is being replayed, dissected, and debated across the entire tennis world, and why it might be the key to everything that happens next at Flushing Meadows. To understand why one sentence from a coach could set off this much noise, you first have to understand the player standing behind it. Alex Eala did not arrive at this moment by accident, and she did not arrive quietly either. But for years, the tennis world simply wasn't watching close enough. She grew up far from the traditional tennis powerhouses. There were no Grand Slam titles waiting for her, no overnight breakthrough, just a left-handed game, a lethal two-handed backhand, and a long, patient climb through challenger events and qualifying draws that most casual fans never see. For a long time, that is exactly where she stayed. Respected, promising, but not yet a headline. And then, something shifted. Not all at once, but in the way real breakthroughs usually happen. One result stacked on top of another until suddenly the pattern was impossible to ignore. It started to show clearly in the results. A maiden Grand Slam main draw win at the US Open, a first WTA Tour final in Eastbourne agonizingly contested against Australia's Maya Joint, then a deep run in Miami, a semi-final in Berlin, and a ranking that kept climbing instead of stalling out the way so many next big things tend to do. But it was Wimbledon that changed everything. On the lawns of the All England Club, Eala didn't just win matches, she made history. She defeated defending champion and world number 3, Iga Swiatek, a result that sent shockwaves through the tour and instantly reframed how people talked about her. She became the first player from the Philippines to ever reach the second week of a Grand Slam, advancing all the way to the fourth round before her run finally ended. In doing so, she climbed to a career-high ranking of world number 28 and became the first Filipina player ever to be seated at a major. Somewhere in the middle of that unforgettable stretch, she even shared the court with tennis royalty, teaming up with 7-time Grand Slam champion Venus Williams in doubles at the Bad Homburg Open, where the unlikely pairing reached the quarterfinals. It was an incredible experience, one more marker of just how far this journey had already taken her. By the time the entry list for the US Open was released, Eala's name sat there in black and white, officially confirmed for the season's final major, ranked number 29, alongside the very biggest names in the sport, Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff, Mira Andreeva, and Iga Swiatek once again. This wasn't a wild-card story anymore. This wasn't a feel-good underdog appearance. This was a legitimate contender walking into Flushing Meadows with a target on her back for the first time in her career. And that is exactly the moment her coach chose to speak. Because when expectations rise this fast, when a player goes from promising to feared in the span of a single grass court season, the people around her start to feel the pressure, too. Coaches get asked the same question over and over: is this real, or is this a fluke? Can she actually do this again on a different surface against players who will now take her far more seriously than they ever did before? For most coaches, the safe answer is a cliché. Take it one match at a time, stay in the moment, don't get ahead of yourself. Eala herself has echoed exactly that kind of humility in her own words, describing her mindset as a continuous process, match by match, round by round, refusing to name a specific target before the tournament even begins. But her coach didn't give the safe answer. He gave something else entirely, and that is where our story really begins. It didn't come during a loud press conference scrum or a post-match interview under bright lights with dozens of cameras pointed at his face. It came in a quieter setting, the kind of reflective conversation coaches sometimes give when they are not performing for headlines, but simply trying to explain what they see in the athlete standing in front of them every single day. Joan Bosch, the man who has guided her technical and tactical development, was asked what actually sets her apart. Not her forehand, not her serve speed, not the physical tools that scouts love to measure. He was asked, in essence, what makes her different from every other talented young player who has ever walked onto a WTA practice court with big dreams and a big game. His answer was almost deceptively simple. He said she can learn, and that, he explained, is rare. Read that again, because on the surface it sounds like nothing. Of course she can learn. Every professional athlete learns. But Bosch wasn't talking about basic coachability. He was describing something much harder to find, the capacity to internalize information in real time and translate it directly into match play under extreme pressure against opponents actively trying to prevent her from doing exactly that. He explained that while many players rely on instinct, on repetition, on patterns drilled so deeply into muscle memory that they simply react, she does something different. She adapts. She adjusts mid-match, mid-tournament, mid-season, folding new information into her game almost as fast as she receives it.
Necessarily have a player from the Philippines you could emulate. Who did you look up to?
From the Philippines was difficult to, I didn't really have anyone from home to look up to at this stage. But internationally, I looked up a lot to Maria Sharapova. So when I was younger, I didn't really understand what was kind of going on in the game. I liked that she was fiery, I liked that she was aggressive, and of course, she presents herself very well. I felt like, she always had nice outfits.
Crucially, he tied that mental flexibility to something else, emotional control. The ability to learn under stress without spiraling, without letting a bad game or a lost set unravel the process. He went further still, calling her a very special person because of her character, not just her talent, but the person underneath it. For a coach who is not known for effusive public praise, for a man whose public comments tend to be measured, technical, and almost clinical in their restraint, this was something completely different. This was a coach essentially telling the tennis world to watch closely, because what they were about to see wasn't luck. It was a mechanism, and it works. That distinction mattered enormously, especially given the timing. Bosch made these comments while discussing how her team had approached the transitional period from hard courts to clay earlier in the season, a stretch where, with limited preparation time following her run in Miami, the coaching staff deliberately focused on small, targeted adjustments rather than any dramatic overhaul of her game. No radical rebuild, no emergency fixes, just incremental refinement layered on top of a player who could actually absorb it. It is a small window into a coaching philosophy that prizes patience over panic, and it directly explains why her rise has looked less like a single explosive breakthrough and more like a steady compounding climb. Miami, Eastbourne, Berlin, Wimbledon, each result built on the lessons of the last rather than existing as an isolated lightning strike. But here is the thing about a quote like that dropped quietly into a sports feature without much fanfare. It doesn't stay quiet for long. Once it reached the wider fan ecosystem, clipped, screenshotted, and shared across forums and social platforms, it stopped being a throwaway coaching insight and became something people felt compelled to react to. Because if you strip away the technical language, what Bosch was really saying was this: Alex Eala isn't peaking, she is still building. And if her rivals thought Wimbledon was the ceiling, this quote suggested otherwise. That is when the debate truly erupted. There is a particular kind of moment in sports fandom where a single line, said almost in passing, takes on a life completely separate from the person who said it. Fans didn't just read Bosch's comments, they picked them apart, sentence by sentence, the way you might analyze a cryptic message for hidden meaning. Was this simply a proud coach describing his player accurately, or was it something more calculated, a quiet declaration aimed squarely at the rest of the WTA locker room that Eala was about to become a genuine top 10 threat? Debate threads filled up fast. Some fans framed it as the tennis equivalent of a mic drop, a coach effectively telling everyone else on tour to pay attention because the player who just knocked out a former Wimbledon champion wasn't a one-tournament story. Others took a more skeptical angle, wondering whether learning ability was really code for something less tangible, a mental edge and emotional stability that her rivals simply didn't have and couldn't replicate, no matter how hard they trained. Then, Almost as if on cue, Eala's own public comments got pulled directly into the conversation, creating a fascinating contrast that fueled the discussion even further. While her coach was out there describing her in terms usually reserved for generational talents, Eala herself kept saying almost the opposite. Ask her about the US Open, and she will tell you she doesn't have a specific round in mind that she's chasing. She will tell you, in her own words, that her approach is match by match, round by round, a continuous process in her journey through professional tennis rather than a countdown towards some predetermined outcome. During her homecoming celebration, surrounded by passionate fans and children who gathered just to get a glimpse of her, she repeated that same grounded philosophy. She wants to get as far as she possibly can, and yes, the ultimate goal is always to win, but she will take it round by round, refusing to get ahead of herself. That gap between a coach publicly hyping her upside and a player publicly refusing to hype herself at all became the real engine of the story. It wasn't a contradiction that damaged either party. If anything, it deepened the intrigue. Here was a young athlete who seemed almost uncomfortable with the spotlight her own results were dragging her into, paired with a coach who seemed determined to make sure the world understood exactly what they were watching. Fans latched onto that tension because it felt human and authentic. It wasn't a scripted rivalry or a manufactured feud. It was simply two people, coach and player, approaching the same extraordinary moment from two completely different emotional angles. One was managing expectations downward to protect her focus, while the other, perhaps unintentionally, was raising them sky high in the process of just answering a question honestly. And so the clip spread further. Podcasts picked it up, tennis commentary channels dissected it, and the phrase, "She can learn, and that's rare," started appearing in fan captions, bios, and highlight reel titles, transformed from a quiet coaching observation into a rallying cry for an entire fan base. Not everyone was convinced this was purely a celebration, however. As the story grew louder, so did the questions underneath it. Every viral moment in sports eventually meets its skeptics, and this one was no exception. As Bosch's comments continued to circulate, a quieter, more uneasy conversation started forming alongside the celebration. If a coach is willing to say publicly that his player possesses a rare and special quality, the kind of trait that separates good players from truly great ones, then the question immediately becomes, what happens if she doesn't deliver on that promise at the very next opportunity?
Tennis Weekly here, and Alex Eala creating more history on the tennis court. She is the first player from the Philippines to reach week 2 at a major in the Open era. And Chris, I'm not gonna lie, the reaction, the buzz, the support for Eala, it's on a scale I don't think I've ever seen before.
I've never seen anything like it either. I think the amount of attention she gets, the buzz that she generates is absolutely huge. I think it's bigger than some of the top players.
That opportunity, of course, is the US Open. The last Grand Slam of the season, a hard-court major with a completely different surface and rhythm from the grass she conquered at Wimbledon. This time, she won't be sneaking up on anyone. Every top player in that draw now knows exactly who Alex Eala is and exactly what she has already proven she can do. That is where the tension really lives. Some fans and pundits started to ask, gently but pointedly, whether Bosch's praise had inadvertently raised the stakes to an almost impossible level. It is one thing to be an inspiring underdog story reaching the second week of Wimbledon for the first time. It is another thing entirely to walk into the US Open being discussed in the same breath as future top 10 talents, while your current ranking sits at world number 29. Skeptics pointed to the natural volatility of young careers. Plenty of players have had one magical fortnight only to find the weight of newfound expectation harder to carry than the matches themselves. A statement like Bosch's, however well-intentioned and accurate, becomes a standard hanging in the air. Every early exit afterward risks being read not just as a loss, but as evidence against the very praise that had just been lavished on her. There was a deeper undercurrent to the conversation, too, one that echoed through some of the more pointed corners of tennis fandom. This is a sport with a long, sometimes uncomfortable history of building young players up rapidly, only to watch the same commentators tear them down just as fast the moment results dip. Fans who have followed enough careers knew the pattern. The warmth of a viral, feel-good quote can curdle quickly into pressure, then into intense scrutiny, and finally into disappointment if the next chapter doesn't match the last one's magic. So, even as the majority of the reaction remained overwhelmingly positive, proud, and excited for what a major run might look like for the first Filipina seed in Grand Slam history, there was a quieter thread of caution running underneath it, a recognition that hype, even earned hype, comes with a cost attached. Was Eala ready to carry that, or had one honest, well-meaning sentence from her coach just made an already difficult tournament even harder? So, was it really a bombshell? Or was it simply the truth said out loud at a moment when people were finally paying close enough attention to notice? When you step back from the headlines and fan debates and actually examine what Bosch described, there is nothing scandalous about it at all. What there is, instead, is a rare, honest window into exactly how this improbable rise has actually been built, piece by piece, adjustment by adjustment, over months rather than overnight. Remember what he said about the transition from hard courts to clay: limited preparation time, targeted adjustments instead of structural overhauls, allowing her to build progressively without compromising the game that was already working. That is not the language of a coach chasing a viral moment. That is the language of someone describing a deliberate methodology that prioritizes sustainable growth over dramatic reinvention. When you trace the results across the season with that philosophy in mind, the pattern becomes obvious. It wasn't one miracle tournament. It was Miami building into Eastbourne, Eastbourne's heartbreak feeding into a maiden Grand Slam win, that win compounding into a deep run in Berlin, and Berlin's lessons carrying directly into the biggest fortnight of her career at Wimbledon. Every result functioned less like a separate headline and more like a single continuous sentence, exactly the kind of continuous process Eala keeps describing in her own words. Bosch's comment about her ability to learn wasn't hype detached from evidence. It was the explanation for the evidence. It is why a hard-fought loss doesn't derail her the way it derails so many young players. It is why a transition between surfaces, something that has ended plenty of promising seasons early, became just another adjustment to absorb and build from. Emotional control paired with genuine adaptability isn't a flashy quality, but it might be the single most important one in a sport this unforgiving. The truth beneath the bombshell framing turns out to be reassuring. It is the coach quietly confirming that what fans watched happen at Wimbledon wasn't a lightning strike that will inevitably fade, but the visible result of a process that had been working underneath the surface all along. That doesn't mean the pressure disappears, nor does it erase the gap between where she is ranked now and the elite company her coach believes she belongs in. But it does reframe the entire story. This wasn't a coach setting his player up to fail under impossible expectations. This was a coach explaining why he believes she won't. Now, standing on the edge of the US Open, a 21-year-old from Metro Manila carries more weight into a Grand Slam than she ever has before. Not because of anything she said, but because of 5 words her coach shared with the world: she can learn, and that's rare. A phrase that started as a technical observation has become a promise, a hope, and a challenge hanging over every match she is about to play in New York. For Philippine tennis, the stakes reach far beyond one player's individual ambition. Eala has already rewritten the record books, and a strong run at Flushing Meadows would cement the idea that Wimbledon wasn't an outlier, but the foundation of something monumental. Whether those 5 words turn into fuel or become a heavy burden remains to be seen. But as the curtain rises on the US Open, one thing is certain: a single honest sentence from a quiet coach has turned an already compelling journey into an absolute must-watch event.